Good morning. Assalamu alaikum, folks. I hope you guys are doing well during the time of this pandemic. It's too bad that we are not doing this in person for the first time, but I'm hoping that next year will probably bring us and more speakers to actually come locally and present and be able to interact with you in a much more effective fashion. This is thanks to Nasyam as well as Mariela for organizing this. We've been talking about having this user group for some time now, and I'm glad that this is taking shape in the form of a virtual event. You know, it's not exactly what we wanted, but it's better than not having an event at all. So my first presentation, and of course, there are lots of other cool speakers through the rest of the day with Mike Dietrich, Fernando, as well as with Osama, that you can have a myriad of different sorts of topics. But my topic is going to focus on how to use Exachk to basically manage Exadata environments. So by the way, Exachk is a utility that is used to actually manage Exadata environments. But if you're not an Exadata DBA and you use Oracheck to also manage like non-Exadata environments, this presentation is also useful for that because most of the options are similar. So with that, we'll get started. So first of all, what is Exachk? Exachk is a utility that is normally used for doing best practices compliance and all that sort of stuff on your systems. You basically don't have to, the tool is meant to be a self-service tool. So you don't really need to send anything to Oracle. And it's basically giving you automatic proactive warnings. You can automatically ask it to email your results so you can see what's actually going on, as well as if you're looking at a whole bunch of your systems, you can find out which systems are compliant and which ones are not. And you can see the output in any tool of your choice. And we'll go into more details in all of these different things. Now, how do we build this tool, right? So first of all, a lot of ideas come in, so we talk to customers and everybody tells us you can do this, you can do that, you can add these checks, you can make this faster. I wish you could show me something cluster-wide. Then we have an expert review meeting every week to see what can be done. Then we also review the Exadata best practices MOS note. And then we bake this all back into the default deployment. So whenever a new Exadata system is deployed, we can basically run Exachk and it will show you a clean report of the entire system. So we verify that the tool is not going to show you anything that is wrong in the case of a fresh system or a brand new deployment that comes in. And then afterwards, it's used to basically track anything that goes wrong in a system over a period of time. So Exachk, as of last December, is basically part of the Autonomous Health Framework. And the Autonomous Health Framework, or AHF, is a tool that mainly includes 3 different pieces, of which 2 pieces have been released. One of them is Exachk, and the other one is TFA for log collections. The third one is coming sometime soon. It'll be sometime either late this year or early next year. But this is going to be a web dashboard for viewing all of this content and compliance triaging and checking. But this presentation will only focus on the first one, which is basically what Exachk is and how you can use it. Now, I have some slides, and I'll actually show you a link from where you can download these slides, so you don't have to constantly make notes as the presentation goes by. You can download these slides later from the OJB EMEA site or from my slide share at some point in time. Okay, so pay attention to the slides. Try to learn as much as you can instead of trying to make notes. So one of the benefits of having Exachk in AHF is you have all of these features that are kind of shared, which TFA as a tool already had. So from lifecycle management to scheduling of automated tasks to automatically running things on remote nodes without creating SSH connections to task delegation from going from root to like low privilege users, as well as executables available from any location. So the AHF is like a package that is used to deploy all of these tools across all of the server infrastructure. How do you upgrade to AHF? How do you get AHF? So Exachk is part of AHF. How do you get AHF? So from November 2019 onwards, AHF is available from my Oracle support. From December 2019 onwards, it's contained in OEDA. OEDA is the installation tool or configuration tool for the Exadata environment. And from 20C onwards, AHF is also contained in the base GI and the database. This is actually also there in 19C in some of the later versions like 19.3 and 19.4. AHF is also contained in the base GI and database versions. Now, a couple of changes. All the tools that are under AHF are moved out of the GI home into the AHF location home, which is a separate home. All the tools are maintained in a separate home from the software homes. So it basically makes software lifecycle management a lot more easier. And as you can see, the tools will also share resources. So Exachk is going to use TFA and TFA socket mechanisms, so you don't need SSH. And TFA is going to use the Exachk mechanisms to collect cell diagnostics. So in other words, you need to use AHF for doing all of this. Now, within AHF is Exachk. What are the various use cases for Exachk? So first of all, for running best practices and monitoring, the default is automated, which means it automatically runs at a fixed interval once every day at a specific period of time with a certain number of checks, and it stores the results in a specific location. The second one is you can basically run things for on demand. On demand meaning I go invoke it. Like if I'm running this from DOM0, then I'm basically going to invoke cells and say I want to invoke this on cells and switches. Then I can actually specify the flags for this. By the way, if you have questions, there's a Q&A option in the Zoom meeting. You can put all your questions there. And once we finish, I'll go ahead and try to address as many questions as I can, okay? I'm going to continue the presentation, and once we finish the presentation, we'll go through the questions. The other time to do this is basically when you're doing any major configuration changes. So anytime before and after any configuration changes that you are doing, that's a good time to run Exachk. Or anytime before and after any planned maintenance software or hardware, you're changing something, you're changing DIMMs, you're pulling out servers, anything you're doing that is going to change the configuration of the infrastructure of the system, that's a good time to run. These are the good times to basically run Exachk. So there's an automated mode, there's an on-demand mode, and then before any other configuration or maintenance, it is expected to be run. Now, what does a report basically look like? It's actually very simple. It's a very simple tool. It tells you a score. The closer to 100 you are, the better it is. It gives you information, what kernel version you have, what CRS homes you have. These are all the DB homes you have. And all these are hyperlinks that you can click and see the information about your databases. It tells you how many nodes, how many database servers, what version it is, how long did it take to complete. Now remember, if you have more homes, more databases, it's going to take some time to complete, which is why we have something called profiles. And we'll talk a little bit about this as we go to the options. So in the report, there is a whole bunch of stuff, but the most important thing that you have to concentrate on is you want to show only critical and failed checks. So you can just check these two, and everything else, if you want, you can uncheck and you don't have to look at all this data. By default, anything that passes is not displayed, and anything that fails is displayed, okay? So here's an example of everything that is displayed. So usually anything that is in green here, which says pass, is not displayed. Only these will be displayed, of which the most interesting ones are the critical ones and the failure ones. The warnings and the infos are warnings and infos, and you just have to take a look at them and decide if they are going to cause problems for you or not. But the ones that are definitely in red are the ones you have to address because they could cause outages or problems on your system. If you click on any of the recommendations, it tells you everything. So one thing about Exachk is everything is self-contained. You don't have to leave Exachk to go anywhere else to collect any information or do any kind of review. It's all completely self-contained within the report itself. So in this case, it's going to tell you what this failed check is. What is it? This is EX57. And it even tells you what it is. And this is some kind of a bug that causes heavy RDMA traffic on the interconnect network, whether using Rocky or InfiniBand-based server storage, and which machines are affected by it, and a link to the MOS node that basically tells me what to do with it. So this is kind of like it's a single centralized location for all data about this particular check. So the cool thing is when Exachk was built, the goal was that you should not have to go anywhere else or click on multiple things or run different utilities or read notes to get information about something. So this is a completely consolidated utility that has everything in one place. So this is one example of a check. This is the MAA section that also scans and tells you what are the recommended versions you have, what are the software versions you have, what are the recommended versions you have. Sometimes we say the version is okay or it's not okay. So we have certain checks that we find if the versions are too old or if there's serious issues known between the version you have and the version that we recommend, then we basically say that this version is not within the recommended range and you need to upgrade that. So This is kind of like it gives you a patch matrix of your entire system and tells you which ones you should be upgrading. How does the architecture of Exachk and Norcheck work? It's actually very simple. It's a health check engine that basically runs here, and it can produce outputs in HTML, in XML, in JSON, or it even has the ability to run things and transform the whole thing into a SQL schema that you can run your queries against. So the entire Exachk output can be converted into a schema where you can basically run and write your own reports. And we'll talk about each of these things as we go through the presentation. But this is basically the architecture. It integrates with an Apex application called Collection Manager. It also integrates with Enterprise Manager. You can ingest it into an ELK stack. And this is what I told you, which is a product which we use internally called AHF service, but this is also going to be available at some point on-prem. Exachk supports all of this. Most of the engineered systems between Orcheck and Exachk, you can basically run across anything, whether you're running on autonomous, whether you're running on standalone, whether you have rack deployments, whether you're doing MAA scorecards, whether you're upgrading from 12C to 18 to 19C, whether you're doing application continuity, you have SAP, you have Sable, you have PeopleSoft, you have Oracle CRM, you're running this on the ODA, the database appliance. Any of these machines, these utilities basically will work. So this is pretty cool. You can basically take this and run this on any of these if you have them in your environment. And the same commands, the same options work across everything. So one thing is, as I told you, if you run the full Exachk, it kind of takes some time. So there's an option of -profile, and there's a link here, which I've given to all the various kind of profiles that you can select. So I can say -profile DBA, and it only runs the database specific checks, which means it will complete in like 5 or 10 minutes instead of 50 minutes. So depending on how many databases and how many machines you have, if it's a full rack, it could take 50 minutes if you have like at least a few 10, 20, 30 databases running out there. If you have a half rack with like 1 or 2 databases, it will complete in like 5 or 10 minutes. So it depends on how many databases you have, how many cell servers you have, how many IB switches you have. It will take that much amount of time to complete. Remember, this utility is intended to be non-intrusive, non-CPU consuming. So as a result of which, it will take longer to complete without affecting your system, okay? So the -profile option basically tells you how to reduce the total number of checks that can be run based on a specific profile target. Pre and post upgrade is for upgrade readiness. If you want to limit this on an Exadata, you can basically limit it to cells, limit it to cluster nodes, limit IB switches, or limit to the number of databases by specifying DB names, and then you can say, DB2, DB4, whatever. You can specify all the names of the DB here, and that will only run against those databases, and it will not run against all the other databases. So this is a couple of options. In a virtualized Exadata environment, you basically you can install AHF into the management domain for DOM0, and then run the Exachk command as a root. When you do this, it discovers all compute nodes, storage servers, IB switches in the entire IB fabric. Again, you can subset this by either running against by specifying cluster nodes to designate databases, by cells to designate storage servers, and by IB switches to designate InfiniBand switches. So this is how you can limit where it can run. Once you finish this, you can basically do a TFS-CTL setup upload and then upload this data into a schema or upload it directly to MOS once you have it ready. So there are different, once you collect this data, and if you want to provide this to an engineer to basically look at, to be able to see what's wrong with your environment when they're troubleshooting something, that is one of the options you can use. Now, which is the user you should run this at? This is a very common question that keeps coming. By default, you should run this as root if you can. By default, what Exachk will do is it will sudo to the lower level privilege owners, which is basically RDBMS or GI homes. And by default, for Exadata storage, it will also use root. And for InfiniBand switches, it will use root, or it will use nm2 user when it's run as any other user. You can override these settings by setting rat cell SSH user and rat IB switch user environment variables, as if you want to override the default user, because it depends on what you have created your environment using. And obviously, when you specify these two parameters, you can only provide the lower privilege accounts. You cannot specify that as root. So by default, run it as root. and it will sudo to the lower privilege accounts when it needs to run something. You can also run this as the RDBMS or the grid owner, but this user must be able to switch to root for any kind of checks. So in other words, either you set up sudo or you specify the root user ID whenever it will ask for it. And you can pre-configure passwordless SSH, or you allow it to configure these private keys automatically. If you're running on supercluster, then you have to use role-based access control. If you're running on Exalogic, you have to run this as root. So these are the things that you have to remember. It's not complicated. Usually you pick away and you kind of stick with it. Depends on what you have in your environment. Some people have database users with sudo that can sudo to root. So they can use sudo and they can go that way. You have to find what is the right method for executing this thing in your environment, because we know that many administrators do not have root privileges to run these things. By default, if you don't have passwordless SSH configured, it's going to prompt you for the password. Once you give the password, it will create these public-private key pairs and will copy them to your local node. Once it finishes running, it will remove these. So it won't keep the passwordless SSH around, but it's going to keep it around for the time of the execution, and it will get rid of this. If you have the AHF stack already running, it will also use the TFA sockets to basically connect to each other's nodes and get the data back without actually having to do anything to do with SSH or SSH keygen. So that's one thing with the AHF stack that actually works pretty well. Next, you can set up email notifications. So every morning, you can basically say, send me the latest report, the previous report, and a diff report. So you can look at anything in the diff reports. If the diff reports are clean, that means nothing has changed in the system. Like if I just look at this, I can say there was 86 checks and now the health score is 85, which means something has failed. And I can see here that 2 checks have failed, and I can go back and look at this. Otherwise, it just takes me like 5 seconds to scan this and say, everything looks good. And you can even automate this. So I will show you going forward how you can actually automate some of this. So these are email notifications you can send for your important critical service. There's an option called Diff. When you run a Diff baseline comparison report, what it does is it basically takes the first collection and the second collection, and it basically finds how many differences are there and what is unique in either one of them. And then it finds common findings. So it quickly runs a full diff output between the two, and it tells you what passed where on which run. So you can quickly compare and see what is failing on the server. Now, so this is a very powerful feature of Exachk and Autorun. When you run this, you should run this by default every day, and it by default generates a diff report. You should only look at the diff report, because the diff report will tell you what is wrong in your server without actually having to look at the whole report and everything that has failed inside it. How do you install this? By default, it's installed already, but in case you want to reinstall it, or you're installing it on a fresh server, or you want to play with it, this is what you can do. So first thing is you download AHF, and there's this utility called AHF setup. It starts, you can see a build version. This is 19.3, what date it was built. So you can split, and you can see that's the time it was built. The location, where it is installed, where it is going to store diagnostic collections. It requires some amount of space. It'll offer you the options. And then once you specify the directory where you want the installation to complete, you can specify email addresses for notifications. Once it extracts it, it configures TFA, it discovers the nodes and all the Oracle resources, and then it creates the systemd hooks to automatically start the service. And then it tells you where it is running, what status it is, what PID it is, and then all the locations of the tools where they have installed inside the AHF stack. Where the repository is, this is where all the TFA output files will go. This is where the data is stored. This is the diag directory. This is where the Autorun utility is. So you can basically see this as an output of the installation itself. So all the AHF binaries that you need will basically be sitting in opt oracle.ahf bin /ahf/bin. That's where all these utilities will be found that you can invoke. You can install as non-root. Some people do not prefer to install this as root. But remember, what you will lose is you will lose the automated diagnostic collections, because you cannot configure to run through systemd and all of these utilities. You can't get collections from remote hosts. And any files like var log messages that are basically owned by non-Oracle owners, or any Oracle GI infrastructure logs, you will not get those. Anything you cannot basically read or you don't have file permissions on, you will not be able to access those. This is how you install if you're installing as a non-root user. So instead of just doing AHF setup, you have to specify -AHF lock and this location. This, as you notice, I'm not installing it as root. I'm installing it as a regular, say, an Oracle user. It will do the same thing. It will install the same thing. It'll give me a similar picture. The only difference is it's not running as root, as a result of which it cannot do some of the actions that we are supposed to, which we automatically do as part of the root build. Okay. So this is an install for non-root. One thing is, Exachk has this option called a daemon option. By default, when you configure the daemon, it will run in a schedule. So in this case, this schedule is run at 2 a.m. in the morning. Okay. Now remember this, it's minutes, hours, days of the months, days of the weeks. So what 2**135 means is basically run at 2 a.m. in the morning, basically run all the time, and run it for 135, which is basically the days of the week. So 0 to 6 are basically Sunday to Saturday. So this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? So Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2 a.m. run this schedule. So you specify this auto run schedule, and the tool will automatically run depending on what it is. You can also specify a profile. So I'm just saying run DBA related checks and tag it as DBA. So that tag will basically be appended to the file. So you will know that this was basically a profile for that. And you can also set notification emails on the server to basically send you emails based on that. So this is how you configure the daemon. How do you set up auto run schedules? And it will run this automatically on those schedules. It's like setting up, instead of running it on cron, you're basically using the scheduler that's provided within Exachk. Two other important options: collection retention. By default, it's 30 days. You can increase this to keep, otherwise the older files will be deleted. And the password check interval, which means how many hours the password validation should be done. Otherwise, after which, if the password validation fails, it's going to stop and notify you via email and log saying, hey, this cannot be run anymore. So these are the two settings you can do in the daemon. One thing that constantly keeps coming up is, what are all the checks that Exachk does? There's this thing, and this is a link directly to a site that gives you what they call the health check catalog. You can basically browse everything that it does with the checks, the details, what category the check is in, and the link to the details in the KM doc as to what it is. Now, if you notice here, you can select the product areas, you can select the profile, you can select the alert levels and the platform, and you can automatically see the listing. So I could say for 19C database and GI, I only want the critical checks. What are those checks? And I can see that listing here without actually having to run the utility on the system. So this is for people who want to see what the tool is going to check for without running the tool on the system. This is called a health check catalog. Now, checks run against all, these are various options for database checks. This is basically which cluster nodes I want to run this against. If I want to run only local, then I can say local only. If I want to run DB all, it basically runs the checks on all databases. If I do DB none, it basically runs checks on no databases. If I specify DB names, it specifies only the databases after DB names to run the checks against. And if I do -PDB names, it only runs them against the subset of PDBs. So there's lots of options that you can configure automatically as part of your execution when you know what you want to run against. Now, one thing that people keep asking is, hey, but there's CVU and there's Exachk, right? So what should I run? So by default, CVU is integrated as part of Exachk, and optionally in this case for Exachk deployments. So when you run these tools, they basically call each other. So when you run Exachk, it calls CVU automatically. If you run Exachk, it's optional. It does not by default include it. So you need to specify -CVU, CVU, or include CVU. This is only required for Exachk. So some DBAs say, look, I don't want to run CVU and I don't want to run Exachk. give me an option that you run CVU and aggregate the results inside the Exachk run. So this include CVU option, which is only required for Exachk, you have to specify. And that's going to give you the ability to incorporate those checks back into the same system, back into the Exachk report. So you're not running multiple tools and everything is provided in the same centralized location. By default, all the outputs go to a specific location in an output directory. The main reports are in HTML. The temporary directory can be changed. Some people want a different temporary directory than /tmp. You can specify the rat tmp directory location. This will basically point it out to some other location that is there. And the temporary directory in this case can also be reflected in etc sudoers. So there are lots of options and customizations in order to, if you want the root privilege, so the root privilege checks will drop a script and then run it as a root. Now, some people don't like that script in the temp directory. So you can use rat root shdir to store that root script in a more secure location. So that's one option that you can specify. You have to do all of this configuration once on your system and then just keep running it. That's the beauty of it. It doesn't take too long to do. And once it's set up, it's completely automated. We run a whole bunch of database checks. While running database checks, some of these database checks can be executed in parallel. I can specify parallelism. I can specify serial. Or I can just say DB parallel max means use as many slaves as you can. The problem is you don't want to obviously specify DB parallel max. Some customers want to run Exachk really fast and finish it. So they'll run it at 2 a.m. in the morning. Some customers run it anytime. So they want its serial execution. Serial execution takes longer, but it will complete with a whole bunch of stuff. If I have multiple reports, I can merge these reports with a -merge option. If I have multiple reports, I can do a diff of these reports with the -diff option. So there's a lot of options in Exachk how you can tag, merge, and you can compare reports. I already mentioned about profiles. You can create your own profiles. So by the way, every check in Exachk has a check ID, which is a long number. If you want to develop your own profile, you can create a profile and you can add your own check IDs. So I say these 10 checks, what I want to run in my environment. I find their check IDs and I create a profile and I add all the check IDs one after the other. And then I can run the profile with that profile name. And it's a custom user-defined profile. And it will only run the checks that I have specified. So I can create my own profile. The same thing, I can exclude something from the execution. I know the check IDs. Like say I'm checking for data guard environments. I don't have data guard in my environment. So I don't want to complain about data guard all the time. I find the checks related to data guard and I take those and I do an exclude check on data guard. So this is one option that I can do. So this is an exclude check, which means remove these checks. The other one was create a profile with those check IDs, which means run only these specific checks for this profile. So there's lots of options, right, of what you can do. I ran Exachk. It ran for 45 minutes and it failed. Okay, something that went wrong. I don't know what went wrong. I can go back and run, say, -failed checks and point it to the directory of the previous execution. It will resume only the checks that were not executed. So I don't have to wait another 45 minutes to see what happened. It will pick up the stuff, the remaining 5 minutes of checks that it did not know what to do, and it's going to run them and it's going to finish the report. So this is really cool. It resumes a failed execution from where it failed. That's actually pretty cool. One thing that people use all the time, especially before they do patching, is they use this thing. It's called orcheck or Exachk file attribute start. What that does is it tracks all the machines and it takes a snapshot of file attributes for all the directories. Now, once I finish this, I can actually, so I do a file attribute start, right? Then I go do my patching activity. Once I finish my patching activity, then I go do a file attribute check. When I do a file attribute check, it will tell me what is the difference in my execution, which files have changed, what permissions have changed, what users and groups have changed. And then I can store this. So tomorrow, if someone comes and tells me you didn't apply that patch properly, I can go back and see what the original file permissions were, and what the new permissions are, and what's gone wrong in my environment. So this is pretty cool. So this is how to check file attributes and how to basically create baselines for them. Some people create Exachk zips. They don't want anybody to open it. So you can encrypt your zip. Once you encrypt it, it's going to ask you for a password. And without the password, you can't open the file. This is a really good practice to have, where you can encrypt, add a password. Anytime you give it to Oracle, say, for example, to view your configuration, without giving the password, people won't be able to open the zip file. So this is pretty cool. There's a REST interface to execute all of this. Instead of invoking the script, you can enable the ORD setup, you can configure it, you can run a full health check. So the options in this case are the start client, you can specify what profile you want to run, what check IDs you want to run. And once you run this, it will return a job ID. Then you can look at the status of the job ID. And then when the status says complete, you can download this job ID and a zip file will be downloaded back. So if you want to run the whole thing, you can run it using REST. There's a cool utility. This is an Apex, which is called Collection Manager, that actually is free, that you can use. All you need is an Apex environment and all the Exachk outputs. Now, I'll give you an example. Say I have 40 Exadata machines. I can take all the automated runs from these machines, put them into one centralized location, load them into this Collection Manager utility, and display its output and review it and slice and dice and do all sorts of interesting analytics with it. So how do you do this? First of all, you set this utility, you set up an Apex environment, and there's a script you run. And then you point the Exachk utility to upload everything to this particular interface. Couple of things about the interface we'll go through, then we can see the setup aspect of it. You can see the interval, you can filter by interval, how long you want to see this. You can create business units, production, development, those kinds, or production for this application, development for that application. You can filter by systems. You can show me anything that has a score of less than 60. Anything that is green is good. Anything that is orange is kind of failing, but it's not there yet. Anything that is red is failing pretty bad, and you have to look at it right now. So these are good ways to be able to figure out what's actually going wrong in this environment and how do you fix it. Within this, you can also see what fails most often in your environments, right? So you can see these are all the things that basically fail, and you can click on this and it tells you what is there, what to do. The same thing that you get in an Exachk report. You can basically see how many times over an entire set of systems that this thing has failed. Click on it, it will show you the failures, it will show you where the failures are, which machines the failures are on. The same thing for warnings. Now here, this is an interesting one, because this is what we use internally to scan a whole bunch of reports, right? So first of all, anything with a green flag is good. If a flag is red, that means something's gone bad in the system, and you have to check the diff with the fail count, the warning counts, and the info counts, and see what is wrong with this. So basically, if you keep seeing green flags, that means there's nothing wrong with the servers. And the servers from yesterday to today, there's no change in the execution. So the only thing is any regressions are found if you find an orange or a red flag. Green flags are all considered good. That's how cool this application is. When you click on it, you can see the same report, except you see the whole thing within Apex. And then you can run filters, you can say status, and you can do platforms. You can do all sorts of cool stuff on this. Same thing with collections. You can see the raw collection or recommendation itself. And you can do your own health. You can write your own health checks. You can write your own SQLs. You can build your own XML and run it as part of Exachk. This is called user-defined health checks. And the details are basically in this slide. So each and every one of these has a link. You can click on the links and you can see the help, as well as you can see what these are and how you can create them. So these are user-defined checks. I'm not going to go into details of this, but this one thing you want to know is how do you set this up? You can set up, so we have Apex 5 or above is supported. 4.2 is just for compatibility. We're probably going to drop support for this soon. There's a script that you can use to set up the schema. There's a user guide. It'll probably take you about 15 minutes to set this up. Once you do this, you can go to this location and you can start accessing your application. And then all the data, once you complete an Exachk execution, you can just specify an upload option. when with an upload option, which is set db upload, it will automatically create this table and it will store all the content of the Exachk output as elements in this table. And then it will make it accessible to SQL and Apex and everything that is there in this. So that's the only setup that you have to do. You have to set db upload and you have to specify the connect string and the password. And these are the various parameters that you have to set. This is all one-time configuration. Once you configure this, it uploads everything, you're done. There's nothing more to do after this. There's integration with Enterprise Manager. By default in Enterprise Manager, there's this thing, it's called compliance standards or compliance framework. A lot of the data for this comes from Exachk by default. There's an Enterprise Manager plugin that you have to configure. Going forward for subsequent Enterprise Manager deployments, you don't have to configure this because we're going to integrate it with the HF. So I've got a couple of screenshots. I'm not going to go through this and spend too much time, but I've put them in this presentation to show you how you can set up Orcheck and Exachk. How do you point it to an Exadata system? All this is using Enterprise Manager. Okay, you can specify root passwords for each cells. You can specify a common password. You can search for or filter by Exachk. It shows you only the checks for Exachk. So there's a whole bunch of ways to do this. This is Exachk generates JSON output. So you can basically integrate this with Kibana, Elasticsearch, and mine all this output and see it like this in a Kibana dashboard. So by default, the JSON. So if you look at the files here, they're basically XML files. There's also Exachk results.json. So you can take this data and you can directly process them with whatever. You can write them into syslog. There's so many things you can do with this thing. You can also integrate this with your own application. Right? Once you upload this, you can write and you can integrate this with your own application because this tables just contains raw data for Exachk. You can write your own reports. You can do all sorts of stuff with this. You don't have to create a fresh application. You can write your own application that consumes all these results. I'm almost out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through one or two more points and then we'll quickly go to questions. So first of all, a lot of people said that, hey, when we upload our Exachk reports, we don't like you to see our host names, IP addresses, database names, table spaces. There's an option now to sanitize the report. When you sanitize the report, it will basically replace any sensitive values with some kind of random characters. Okay, or you can basically replace it, mask it. Problem with you masking it is when you mask something, nobody can basically see it. That's the problem, and we can't solve your problem. But if you sanitize it, then it shows up as a different kind of a sanitized host name. So we don't see the real host name, but we see a fake host name. So we can still look at the report and tell you what's wrong. And that's the sanitized host name. And then on the customer system, they can basically run an Rmap command and it tells you what the real host name is. If the customer wants to go back and see what the mappings are, they can tell you if they want to. So the sanitized host name is, and the ability to sanitize an Exachk report is an important thing. Again, there's another option called, whenever there's something that's wrong, there's an option called show repair. It's going to show you what it's going to run to fix something. So Exachk automatically repairs a certain set of failures. It's not too many checks, but there are certain repair commands that actually, and you can see what it's going to repair before you see what it's going to do. Anyways, so what we'll do is we'll stop here and we'll switch over to questions. Give me a second. We'll stop the share and let's open up Q&A. The first question is, do we really need to practice the thumb rule of score 80 for QFSDP patching releases? No. So actually, it depends on your systems. Usually, I've seen systems that have a score of 80 to 85 are considered good. Now, there are a lot of checks that fail for people, and sometimes they don't really care about these checks. So you should use the exclude checks option to basically eliminate those check IDs and try to bring your score as high as you can. Don't try to aim for 100. Usually anything 80 to 85 upwards is considered to be a good score. What is the best practice to configure and maintain log files within threshold without much ado? That is a different conversation. Log files are basically, you can use TFA and the ADR to limit how long the files are kept, how long they are retained, what the recycle times are. Look for an option called TFA CTL manage logs. That's the option you're looking for logs and log automation. AHF is already the norm for on-premise as well. How do we ensure these big files are automatically uploaded, please? So AHF is a stack. It contains all these tools. It's used to manage, patch, provision, all of these tools. Most of these files are not that big. As a matter of fact, if you're collecting log files and stuff like that, we have the ability to trim down, be as specific in the time window of data collection that you're trying to do. Exachk files usually are anywhere from maybe about 20 megs to about a gig at max. Gig will be like if you have hundreds of databases running on your systems. But usually these files compress really well and they're really small. Okay. So, okay, that's done. The next one, is it possible to send diff report only if the diff number is greater than 0? Yes, there is an option one of the options that does that. Do me a favor, send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter and I can actually send you what that option is. How do you get check IDs? When you are in the report, there's an option. There's a checkbox that says show check IDs. Click on that. The check IDs are the first column in the report that will show up. By default, we don't show check IDs because they're these huge numbers, right? And they clutter a report. But when you are in the report, click on the show check IDs option. It's like a small checkbox. And when you do that, guys, please use the Q&A option. Do not use the chat option. Use the Q&A option to get your questions in there, okay? Again, so check ID. We have 2 questions on check IDs. Aura 27300, Aura 27301, and 302 in EBS without an Exadata system. I don't know what the question is in this case. Maybe you can, Saeed Raza, maybe if you can re-put the question in properly. I don't know what you're asking here. These are 3 different Oracle exceptions I know. I don't know what these mean or what your question is. Which OEM plugin? So by default, you don't need the OEM plugin. The OEM plugin is part of the Enterprise Manager deployment. There's a way to update this plugin internally if you want to get the latest versions. Now, one thing we're doing right now is we're working with Enterprise Manager to do AHF updates. When the AHF updates happen, you won't need to get these plugins. But until then, there's a way to update these OEM plugins. By default, they're already there. So it's not like you have to download and install something to get this functionality. You go to compliance, it's already running, except it may be running an older version of AHF or Exachk. So when you go into Enterprise Manager, there's a set of procedures or steps. My slides have those details as to how to go ahead and update the OEM plugin if you need to. But this is not a new piece of software. It's already installed as part of Enterprise Manager. Will we get recordings? I believe the answer is yes. The recording is happening and this will be uploaded back to the OGB EMEA site. Can Exachk be run during business hours? Best to run during early morning hours. Early morning hours, whenever the system is not functioning, is the best time to run it. By default, so by default today, right? If you get a brand new Exadata system, right? It runs at 2 a.m. in the morning. You don't do anything. It's configured by default. There are different profiles. The profiles allow you to run a smaller subset of checks every day. And at the end of the week, it runs a bigger set of checks. And at the end of 2 weeks or a month, it runs even more bigger set. So basically, we keep running smaller subsets of checks so that you're not kind of like running this stuff all the time. But it will detect failures for you as quickly as it can versus you waiting and you. So if you have to manually run Exachk, you already lost. Because it's like, this is a proactive utility, right? If you don't keep running this frequently, then it's not going to, it's not going to allow you to react to a situation that is already becoming worse that this tool could have probably told you. So run this, use the automated features of Exachk as much as you can without trying to change things, and you'll get the maximum benefit. And use Collection Manager if you don't have Enterprise Manager. It's a free Apex app that can basically store and show you all this cool stuff. It takes like 15-20 minutes. All you need is a pre-existing Apex installation in an existing DB. I did mention that the tool is free, right? So all this stuff that I spoke about is free. Then I think.
Yes, sorry, Sandesh, we have to stop. We have to start the next session in 5 minutes. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. I think that if you got all these questions or other question on Twitter, you will find some time to answer the guys. I don't know. It's just a suggestion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys.
Have a nice weekend, and well, see you in the next session.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Sandesh.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Time.
Enjoy your sessions. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.